The afternoon sun shimmered against the sleek, polished body of the helicopter resting on a private airfield, its rotor blades still as though they were holding their breath. A small crowd had gathered at a distance, their murmurs buzzing like bees, mixing curiosity with suspicion. Near the helipad, a woman stood tall, her tailored suit a clear statement of authority and success. She was Sarah Donovan, the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech company, renowned for her innovation, leadership, and determination. Yet, at this moment, her usual composed demeanor seemed strained. Her piercing blue eyes flicked between the officers blocking her path and the helicopter she was determined to fly. "I've provided all the documentation," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. She held up a folder brimming with papers, licenses, permits, proof of ownership, everything one could possibly need to justify her right to pilot the aircraft. "What's the issue here?" The police officers exchanged glances, their rigid postures betraying a hint of unease. "Ma'am," one of them finally said, his tone cautious, "we're just following protocol. There are concerns about this flight." Sarah frowned, her frustration bubbling beneath her poised exterior. She'd faced countless boardroom battles, fought off corporate takeovers, and built her empire from the ground up. A minor delay like this should have been nothing more than an inconvenience. But something about the officers' behavior, their reluctance to look her in the eye, the cryptic comments, unsettled her. They weren't acting like this was just a routine stop. Behind her, the hum of approaching engines grew louder as more police vehicles rolled onto the scene. The crowd murmured louder, thumbs raised to capture the unfolding drama. The tension was palpable now, like a coiled spring ready to snap. "I'm licensed to fly this helicopter," Sarah repeated, her voice firmer. "I've flown it dozens of times. If there's a specific reason you're stopping me, I deserve to know." Another officer stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Miss Donovan, it's not just about your paperwork. There's more to this situation than you're aware of." "Then enlighten me," Sarah shot back, folding her arms. Her patience was wearing thin, but her curiosity was piqued. What could possibly warrant this level of interference? The officer hesitated, his eyes scanning the airfield as though searching for the right words, or perhaps the courage to say them. Before he could respond, another car screeched to a halt nearby. A man in a dark suit emerged, his presence commanding instant attention. He approached the group with purpose, flashing a badge that bore an emblem Sarah didn't recognize. "Miss Donovan," he said, his voice low but firm, "I need you to come with me, now." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Excuse me, who are you, and what authority do you have to make that demand?" The man didn't flinch. "My name is Agent Carter, Homeland Security, and this isn't just about your helicopter, it's about national security." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap, drawing audible gasps from the onlookers. Sarah's mind raced, trying to piece together what could possibly link her personal flight to a matter of national security. She opened her mouth to demand answers, but Agent Carter cut her off. "I promise, everything will be explained," he said. "But for now, you need to trust me and cooperate." Trust him? Sarah had built her empire by questioning everything, by trusting her instincts and demanding evidence. But as more officers moved in to secure the area, she realized she might not have a choice. Reluctantly, she stepped away from the helicopter, her heels clicking against the concrete as she followed Agent Carter toward his car. The crowd watched in stunned silence, their curiosity now a firestorm of speculation. As the car doors closed behind them, Agent Carter turned to Sarah. "Before we go any further, I need to ask you something. Is there anything at all, that you're not telling us about this flight? Because if there is, now's the time to come clean." Sarah met his gaze, her expression unwavering. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Agent Carter studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "In that case," he said, his tone grim, "prepare yourself. What you're about to learn will change everything." The car pulled away, leaving the helicopter the crowd, and a storm of unanswered questions behind. The silence inside the car was suffocating. Sarah stared out the window, her mind spinning as she tried to make sense of the chaos that had unfolded in mere minutes. Just an hour ago, she was preparing for a routine flight to the company's West Coast headquarters, a trip she'd taken countless times before. Now, she was being driven away by a federal agent under a vague and ominous claim of national security. Agent Carter's focus remained on the road, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. His demeanor was composed, but Sarah noticed the subtle tension in his jaw and the occasional sideways glance he gave her. It was as if he were trying to gauge her reaction, to read her thoughts. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "You keep saying this is about national security. But so far, no one has told me anything that makes sense. What exactly am I being accused of?" Agent Carter didn't immediately respond. Instead, he pulled into an unmarked parking lot behind an inconspicuous government building. The concrete structure was gray and nondescript, blending into the city's skyline as though it didn't want to be noticed. He parked the car and turned to her, his expression serious. "You're not being accused of anything yet," he said. "But there are concerns, and until we have all the information, we need to keep this under control." "Concerns," Sarah echoed, raising an eyebrow. "About me, my company? Or are we still pretending this is about my helicopter?" "It's not pretending," Carter said, his voice firm but not unkind. "And it's not just about the helicopter, but that's part of it. Let's go inside. I'll explain what I can." Inside the building, the air was cool and sterile, the faint hum of fluorescent lights the only sound. They passed through a series of security checkpoints, each one more rigorous than the last. Sarah noticed the way the guards glanced at her, their faces impassive but their eyes curious. She wasn't used to being the subject of scrutiny like this, at least not in a way that felt so personal. Finally, they entered a conference room. A long table sat in the center, surrounded by chairs, and a large monitor on the wall displayed a map with several blinking dots. Carter gestured for her to sit, then took a seat across from her. "Let's start from the beginning," he said. "Your helicopter, do you know its full maintenance and tracking history?" Sarah frowned. "Of course. I personally oversee all major inspections and upgrades. It's my aircraft, my responsibility." Carter nodded. "And you've flown it exclusively, no one else?" "Yes," she said firmly. "I don't lend it out, if that's what you're asking." Carter leaned back, studying her. 2 days ago, your helicopter was flagged by an international monitoring system. A signal was detected coming from its transponder that shouldn't have been there." Sarah blinked. "A signal? What kind of signal?" "A signal associated with encrypted communications," Carter replied. "We believe someone may have tampered with your aircraft." For a moment, Sarah didn't respond. Her mind raced, trying to reconcile what she was hearing with the facts she knew. "That's impossible," she said finally. "The helicopter is kept in a secure hangar when it's not in use. No one could access it without my authorization." "That's what makes this situation so concerning," Carter said. "Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. And they weren't just sending random signals. They were transmitting data to a location outside the country." Sarah's stomach tightened. "Data? From my helicopter? What kind of data?" "That's what we're trying to figure out," Carter said. "But here's the thing. We have reason to believe this isn't the first time it's happened." Sarah's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Carter gestured to the monitor. "We've been tracking similar signals for months, originating from different private aircraft across the country. All of them high profile. All of them tied to individuals with significant influence." A cold chill ran down Sarah's spine. "You think someone's targeting CEOs? Why? What could they possibly gain from this?" "That's the million-dollar question," Carter said. "But whoever is behind, this isn't just targeting random people. They're choosing individuals with access to sensitive information, strategic networks, and resources that could be exploited." Sarah leaned back in her chair, her mind reeling. You think I'm being watched? Or worse, used? It's a possibility, Carter said. And until we know more, we can't take any chances. That's why we had to stop you from flying today. If that helicopter was compromised, you could have been walking into a trap. Sarah's jaw clenched as the weight of his words settled over her. She wasn't used to feeling powerless, and the idea that someone could be manipulating her without her knowledge was almost too much to bear. Who do you think is behind this? She asked, her voice low. We're still investigating, Carter said. But whoever it is, they're highly sophisticated. This isn't some amateur operation. It's coordinated, precise, and well-funded. Sarah's mind flashed to recent events, a sudden surge in cyberattacks on her company, strange glitches in their systems, even an attempted break-in at one of their data centers. At the time, she dismissed them as isolated incidents. But now, a disturbing pattern was beginning to emerge. Why didn't anyone tell me about this sooner? She demanded. If my helicopter was compromised, I should have been informed immediately. We needed to be sure, Carter said. And frankly, we weren't certain how deep this goes. For all we know, there could be insiders involved. The implication hung in the air, unspoken but understood. Sarah felt a pang of anger, at the violation, at the secrecy, and at the realization that she might not even know who she could trust. Carter leaned forward, his expression serious. Miss Donovan, I need to ask you something. Have you noticed anything unusual lately? Anything that seemed out of place? Sarah hesitated, her mind sifting through recent memories. There was an attempted breach at one of our data centers a few weeks ago, she said, and we had some unusual activity in our systems. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now. Carter nodded. That lines up with what we've been seeing. Whoever's doing this isn't just interested in your helicopter. They're interested in you. The words sent a jolt through her. For the first time, the magnitude of the situation truly hit her. This wasn't just about her aircraft or her company. It was personal. Before she could respond, the door opened, and another agent entered the room, carrying a tablet. He handed it to Carter and whispered something in his ear. Carter's expression darkened as he glanced at the screen. What is it? Sarah asked, her heart pounding. Carter hesitated, then looked up at her. We just received new intel. It seems whoever planted that signal on your helicopter, they're already one step ahead of us. Sarah's stomach dropped. What do you mean? They've activated the system remotely, Carter said, his voice grim. And whatever they're planning, it's already in motion. Sarah felt like the room had grown colder. The weight of Agent Carter's words settled over her like a heavy blanket, each moment of silence amplifying the dread creeping into her thoughts. She leaned forward, her palms flat on the table, her composure barely intact. What do you mean, activated? She asked, her voice quieter than she intended. Carter handed her the tablet, the screen displaying a live feed of a blinking dot on a map. The signal was moving rapidly, heading toward the outskirts of the city. That's your helicopter's transponder, Carter said. It was powered on remotely about 10 minutes ago, even though it's still grounded at the airfield. Whoever has control of this system, they're making it look like the helicopter is airborne. Sarah's pulse quickened. But it's not. I saw it parked there. Carter nodded. Physically, it's still there. But digitally, they've created a ghost flight. They're making it appear to tracking systems like it's traveling hundreds of miles away. The question is, why? Why go to all this trouble for a decoy? Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. What's the endgame here? Carter didn't answer right away. Instead, he tapped a few buttons on the tablet, pulling up another screen filled with lines of code. This isn't just about misdirection, he said. We think they're using the signal as a cover to send more encrypted data. If they're successful, it could trigger an international response. They're playing with fire. Sarah's stomach twisted. She didn't understand all the technical details, but she didn't need to. The stakes were clear. Whoever was behind this was using her helicopter to execute a plan that could spiral out of control. "Is there any way to stop it?" she asked. "We're working on it," Carter replied. "But their encryption is next level. Every time we try to trace it, the signal reroutes. It's like chasing a shadow." As he spoke, Sarah's mind drifted to her team back at Donovan Tech. She had some of the brightest minds in cybersecurity working under her. If anyone could help, it was them. But could she even trust her own people at this point? The thought made her chest tighten. "What about my company?" she asked cautiously. "If this is connected to me, could my systems be compromised too?" Carter gave her a measured look. "It's possible. That's why we need to keep this contained. The more people who know, the greater the risk." Sarah hated feeling helpless, but she nodded. She understood the need for caution, even if it meant leaving her team in the dark. Just then, the door opened again, and another agent stepped inside, this one visibly tense. "We've got a situation," he said, addressing Carter. The signals were routing again, but this time it's pinging off a military satellite. It's escalating. Carter stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "What's the destination?" "Unknown," the agent replied. "But if it keeps moving at this pace, it's going to cross into restricted airspace within the hour." Sarah stood too, her hands clenched into fists. "This is insane. Whoever's doing this, they're setting me up for something. I don't know what, but I'm not just going to sit here and watch." Carter glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "And what do you suggest we do, Miss Donovan? This is bigger than you or me. We're dealing with something that could have global consequences." Sarah held his gaze, her determination hardening. "Then let me help. I have resources, connections, people who specialize in this kind of thing. You're treating me like a liability, but I'm not. I'm an asset." For a moment, Carter seemed to consider her words. Then he shook his head. "You're already a target. The last thing we need is to draw more attention to you." Sarah opened her mouth to argue, but before she could, the monitor on the wall flickered. A new image appeared, a live feed of the airfield where her helicopter was parked. It showed the aircraft surrounded by police vehicles and flashing lights. "What's happening there?" Sarah asked, her heart sinking. The agent who had brought the news earlier stepped forward. "Someone just hacked the airfield's security system. They're broadcasting this feed on the dark web, claiming it's a standoff involving classified military tech." Sarah's breath caught. "They're turning it into a spectacle." Carter's face darkened. "It's a diversion," he muttered. "They want to keep us focused on the airfield while they execute the real plan." "But what's the real plan?" Sarah pressed, her frustration boiling over. Carter didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed the tablet and began issuing rapid-fire instructions to the agents in the room. Sarah watched helplessly as the situation spiraled further out of control. She turned back to the monitor, staring at the image of her helicopter. A nagging thought tugged at the edges of her mind. Something about the way it was positioned, the way the officers were standing around it, it felt staged, almost too perfect. "What if they want us to think the helicopter is a target?" she said aloud, more to herself than anyone else. Carter paused, glancing at her. "What do you mean?" Sarah pointed at the screen. "It's too obvious. If this is a sophisticated operation, why would they leave such a blatant trail? What if the helicopter is just a distraction, and the real target is something, or someone else?" Carter frowned, his gaze narrowing. "You think they're using the helicopter as bait?" Sarah nodded. "It's possible. If they've gone to all this trouble to create a ghost flight and broadcast this feed, they're trying to misdirect us. But from what?" Before Carter could respond, another alert sounded on the tablet. The signal had shifted again, this time moving toward the heart of the city. "Whatever they're doing," Carter said grimly, "we're running out of time." As the tension in the room mounted, Sarah felt a surge of determination. Whoever was behind this had underestimated her. She wasn't going to sit idly by while her name and her company were dragged into a conspiracy. Then let's find out, she said, her voice steady. And let's stop them before it's too late. The room felt like it was pulsing with tension, each second dragging as everyone watched the moving signal on the monitor. The dot was heading straight for the city's financial district, a place teeming with corporate headquarters, bustling markets, and key infrastructure. Sarah's mind churned, racing through every possibility, every worst-case scenario. She had faced crisis before, but this was something entirely different. Her life, her reputation, her company, everything was hanging in the balance, and she didn't even know who she was up against. "Why the financial district?" she said, breaking the silence. "What's there that makes it worth all this effort?" Agent Carter didn't look away from the screen. "It could be anything," he replied. "Sensitive corporate data, financial systems, or even the people working there. The question is, what's connected to you?" Sarah bristled at the insinuation. "If you're implying that this is my fault—" "I'm not," Carter interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "I'm saying that whoever's behind this picked you for a reason. Maybe it's your influence. Maybe it's your resources. Or maybe it's something you don't even realize you have." The weight of his words settled heavily on her. Sarah prided herself on being in control, on knowing every aspect of her business and her life. But now, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was playing catch-up in a game where the rules were deliberately hidden from her. Another agent entered the room, holding a printed report. "Sir, we just intercepted partial data from the signal. It's fragmented, but it looks like schematics." Carter grabbed the report and scanned it. His eyes widened slightly, and he looked up at Sarah. "Do these look familiar to you?" he asked, holding the papers out to her. Sarah leaned over the table and took the report. The schematics were technical, detailed, and vaguely familiar. Her eyes darted across the lines and labels until they landed on something that made her heart skip. A logo, tucked into the corner of one of the pages. Her company's logo. "This can't be right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Carter's gaze hardened. "What are we looking at?" "These are designs for our next-generation AI system," Sarah said, her hands trembling slightly as she set the papers down. "It's still in development, completely classified. Only a handful of people at Donovan Tech have access to these files." "Apparently, someone else does too," Carter said grimly. Sarah felt a surge of anger and disbelief. "That's impossible. Our servers are secured with top-level encryption. There's no way anyone could access these files without setting off alarms." "Unless they had inside help," Carter said. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She wanted to argue, to insist that her team was above suspicion, but the truth was gnawing at her. Someone had to be behind this. A mole, a traitor, someone with both access and motive. Who would benefit from stealing these designs? Carter pressed. And what could they do with them? Sarah shook her head, trying to focus. The AI system is designed for large-scale data processing. It's meant to help businesses optimize operations, improve efficiency. But in the wrong hands, she trailed off, her stomach twisting. The applications were endless and terrifying: financial manipulation, surveillance, even cyber warfare. Carter's expression grew darker. If this tech ends up in the wrong hands, it could destabilize entire industries. We need to stop this now. Another alert sounded, drawing their attention back to the monitor. The signal had stopped moving. It was now hovering over a specific building in the heart of the financial district. "That's the Nexus Tower," Carter said, recognizing it immediately. It houses several major financial institutions, including the Federal Reserve's local operations. Sarah's eyes widened. "You think they're planning an attack there?" "Or a theft," Carter said. "If they can infiltrate the Federal Reserve systems using your AI schematics, they could disrupt the economy on a massive scale." The room buzzed with activity as agents began coordinating a response. Carter turned back to Sarah, his expression urgent. "We need to act fast. Is there any way to shut down the signal remotely?" Sarah shook her head. "Not without knowing the source. If it's coming from my systems, We'd need to access the server logs and trace it back to its origin, but even then it could take hours. We don't have hours, Carter said. Sarah hesitated, a thought forming in the back of her mind. It was risky, reckless even, but it might be their only chance. What if I go to the source? She said. Carter frowned. What do you mean? If they're using my helicopter as part of this plan, then they'd left a trail, she explained. If I can get back to the airfield, I might be able to figure out how they're doing it. Maybe even shut it down from there. That's out of the question, Carter said immediately. It's too dangerous. Whoever's behind, this won't just let you walk in and stop them. I don't care, Sarah shot back, her voice rising. This is my company, my name on the line. If I can help stop this, I have to try. Carter studied her, his jaw tightening. He knew she was right, but the risk was undeniable. Finally, he nodded. You're not going alone, he said. Sarah nodded back, her resolve hardening. She had spent her entire career fighting for what she believed in, and she wasn't about to back down now. Whoever was behind this had made one critical mistake. They underestimated her. As the team mobilized, Sarah took one last look at the monitor. The blinking dot on the map felt like a taunt, a challenge she was ready to face. The game wasn't over yet, and she intended to win. The airfield was a flurry of activity by the time Sarah and Agent Carter arrived. Police cars were parked in a chaotic line along the perimeter, their flashing lights casting a harsh red and blue glow over the scene. Officers were stationed at every corner, and Sarah could see the helicopter still sitting on the tarmac, its sleek frame gleaming under the floodlights. It looked untouched, as if none of this chaos could possibly be connected to it. Carter kept a tight grip on Sarah's arm as they moved through the throng of officers and agents. She didn't resist, though her mind raced with questions. The closer she got to the helicopter, the more she noticed subtle details. A faint scuff mark near the tail rotor, the way the maintenance logs had been hastily reattached to the door. Small things, but enough to tell her that someone had been here recently. Over here, Carter said, guiding her toward a temporary command center set up in a nearby hangar. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, the hum of computers and urgent voices creating an undercurrent of urgency. Sarah's eyes landed on a large monitor displaying a real-time feed of the helicopter's transponder signal. It was still active, broadcasting a flight path that made it appear to be circling the city's financial district. But what caught her attention was a secondary screen showing a cascade of encrypted data streams. That's it, she said, pointing. That's the signal they're using to transmit the schematics. An agent at the console glanced back at Carter. We've been trying to trace it, but it's bouncing off too many servers. Whoever set this up knew exactly how to cover their tracks. Sarah leaned in, her mind clicking into problem-solving mode. Can you isolate the origin point? We're trying, the agent replied. But the signal's coming from somewhere inside the airfield. It's localized. Carter turned to Sarah. Could it be the helicopter itself? Some kind of device planted on board? Sarah hesitated, her instincts telling her there was more to this than met the eye. It's possible, she said. But if they went to all this trouble to create a diversion, they wouldn't risk leaving their equipment exposed. It has to be close enough to the helicopter to maintain the illusion, but hidden well enough to buy them time. Before Carter could respond, a sudden commotion erupted outside. Shouts echoed through the hangar, and a wave of tension rippled through the room. What's happening? Carter barked, striding toward the door. One of the officers rushed in, his face pale. We found someone near the perimeter, he said. They were trying to access the restricted area. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Who? The officer hesitated. They're not talking, but they had equipment on them. Signal jammers, a laptop. Looks like they were trying to interfere with the broadcast. Carter exchanged a look with Sarah, his expression unreadable. Where are they now? In custody, the officer replied, but they're refusing to identify themselves. Sarah felt a surge of anger. Whoever this person was, They might be the key to unraveling the entire scheme. She followed Carter as he marched toward the makeshift holding area, her pulse pounding in her ears. The suspect was sitting in a metal chair, flanked by two armed guards. They were dressed in dark clothing, their face partially obscured by a baseball cap pulled low over their eyes. Sarah couldn't see much, but there was something oddly familiar about their posture, the way they sat with an air of defiance. Carter stepped forward, his voice sharp. "Who are you, and what were you doing near the airfield?" The suspect didn't answer, their gaze fixed on the floor. "You were caught with equipment that directly links you to this operation," Carter continued. "If you cooperate now, it'll go easier for you. But if you keep playing games—" "I wasn't part of the operation," the suspect interrupted, their voice low but steady. Sarah's breath caught. She knew that voice. It was unmistakable. "Daniel," she said, stepping closer. The suspect looked up, and Sarah's suspicions were confirmed. It was Daniel, one of her senior engineers. He was brilliant, loyal, or so she had thought. Seeing him here, in this context, made her stomach turn. Carter's gaze snapped to Sarah. "You know him?" "He works for me," she said, her voice tight. "Or at least he did." Daniel's expression softened slightly as he met her gaze. "Sarah, you don't understand. I'm not the enemy here." "Then explain why you're here," Carter demanded. Daniel hesitated, his jaw tightening. "I came to stop this. I've been tracking the signals for weeks. I didn't know who to trust, so I started working on my own. Whoever's behind this, they've been planning it for months. They're not just stealing the schematics, they're building a backdoor into your entire system." Sarah felt a cold wave of fear wash over her. A backdoor? To what end? "To control everything," Daniel said, his voice urgent. "The AI isn't the target, it's the gateway. They're using it to gain access to your corporate network, your clients' systems, even critical infrastructure. Once they're in, they can shut down entire industries, manipulate markets, or worse." Carter folded his arms, his skepticism evident. "And how exactly do you know all this?" "Because I helped design the encryption," Daniel admitted. "Not for this, but for the AI. When I saw the patterns in the signal, I recognized my own work. That's how I knew it was connected to Sarah." Sarah's head spun as she tried to process his words. If Daniel was telling the truth, then the stakes were even higher than she'd imagined. "So you're saying the helicopter is just a smokescreen?" Carter asked. Daniel nodded. "It's a distraction to keep you focused here while they finish setting up the backdoor. If we don't shut it down now, it'll be too late." Carter's jaw tightened as he glanced at Sarah. If he's right, we're running out of time. Sarah felt a surge of determination. "Then let's stop them, whatever it takes." Daniel looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You'll have to trust me, Sarah. It's the only way." Sarah hesitated, torn between doubt and desperation. Finally, she nodded. "Just tell us what to do." The clock was ticking, and every second felt like a lifetime. Sarah, Agent Carter, and Daniel stood in front of the airfield's command center, their plan hastily cobbled together under the weight of urgency. Daniel had outlined the steps they needed to take, but even he admitted it was a long shot. The rogue signal had embedded itself deep within the network, branching out like a virus. If they didn't neutralize it now, the damage would be catastrophic. "I need access to the mainframe," Daniel said, his tone steady despite the gravity of the situation. "The airfield servers are part of the relay. If I can isolate the rogue signal from here, I can cut off the connection before it fully integrates into the system." Carter nodded to one of the agents. "Get him clearance." Sarah stayed close, watching Daniel's every move as he worked. Her trust in him was fragile at best, but she couldn't deny the urgency in his voice or the precision in his actions. He was tapping into systems with a familiarity that only someone intimately connected to the project could possess. "Almost there," Daniel muttered, his fingers flying across the keyboard. As the lines of code scrolled on the screen, Sarah leaned in. What happens if this doesn't work? Daniel hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. If the signal fully integrates, they'll have control of the A's core functions. From there, they can target anything linked to it: financial systems, transportation grids, even defense networks. Sarah's stomach churned. It wasn't just her company on the line anymore. This was bigger than anything she'd ever faced. Suddenly, a new alert flashed across the screen. Daniel froze, his expression darkening. "What is it?" Carter demanded. "They know we're here," Daniel said, his voice tight. "They're countering the shutdown protocol. Whoever's on the other end, they're good." "Can you stop them?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with desperation. "I can try," Daniel said, his hands moving even faster. "But it's like playing chess against someone who's always one step ahead." The tension in the room was palpable. Agents murmured into radios, relaying updates as the situation escalated. Outside, the helicopter sat like a silent sentinel, its presence both ominous and irrelevant. Then, without warning, the screen went dark. The sudden shift was like a gut punch, leaving everyone in the room frozen. "What just happened?" Carter barked. Daniel's face was pale. "They've locked me out. They've taken full control of the system." A heavy silence fell over the room. Sarah felt her heart sink. Had they lost? Was it already too late? But then something unexpected happened. Another screen flickered to life, this one showing a new signal. It wasn't coming from the helicopter or the airfield. It was originating from downtown, near Nexus Tower. "It's a secondary relay," Daniel said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "They weren't just using the helicopter as a decoy. They set up a physical hub to anchor the signal." Carter's expression turned grim. "That's their real target." Sarah's mind raced. "If we can get to the hub, can we shut it down?" Daniel nodded. "If we destroy the relay, we sever their connection to the AI. But we have to move fast." Carter didn't hesitate. "Get a team together. We're going in." The next few minutes were a blur of movement and coordination. Sarah found herself in the back of an unmarked SUV, Carter and Daniel on either side of her as they sped toward Nexus Tower. The streets were eerily quiet, the city unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. When they arrived, the scene was exactly what Sarah had feared. A nondescript van was parked in an alley behind the tower, its rear doors open to reveal a makeshift command center. Inside, a man was hunched over a laptop, his focus unbroken even as Carter's team surrounded him. "Step away from the computer," Carter ordered, his weapon drawn. The man looked up slowly, a smirk spreading across his face. "You're too late," he said, his voice calm. "The system is already online." Daniel pushed past Carter, his eyes scanning the setup. "No, it's not," he muttered, grabbing a nearby keyboard. "We still have time." The man's smirk faltered as Daniel began typing furiously. "You think you can stop this?" he scoffed. "I know I can," Daniel shot back. Sarah watched in tense silence as Daniel worked. The screen was a chaotic mess of numbers and code, the signal fighting back with every command he entered. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but his hands never wavered. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the screen froze. A single message appeared. **** connection terminated ****. "It's done," Daniel said, exhaling sharply. The man in the van cursed under his breath, his confidence shattered. Carter's team moved in, securing him and his equipment as the tension began to ease. Sarah felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. As they stepped out of the alley, her phone buzzed with a new alert. She glanced at the screen and froze. "What is it?" Carter asked, noticing her reaction. Sarah looked up, her face pale. "There's another signal." Daniel's expression darkened. "That's impossible. We shut it down." Sarah shook her head, her hands trembling. "This one's different. It's coming from my company's main server." The realization hit her like a freight train. The entire operation had been a smokescreen, not for the AI or the helicopter, but for something buried deep within Donovan Tech itself. "They're not just stealing technology," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're stealing everything." Carter's face hardened. Then we're not done yet. As the team scrambled to regroup, Sarah's mind was already racing ahead. Whoever was behind, this wasn't just targeting her. They were dismantling her empire piece by piece. And now she knew she was facing an enemy far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Sarah felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her as the team piled back into the SUVs. The urgency in the air was suffocating, and the realization that her company's main server was now the target left her reeling. Everything she had built, everything she had worked for, was at risk of being dismantled by a faceless enemy. But Sarah wasn't about to let that happen. The convoy raced through the city streets, the glow of the skyline casting a surreal light over their mission. Agent Carter was barking orders into his radio, coordinating with teams already stationed at Donovan Tech. Daniel sat next to Sarah, his laptop open on his knees, his fingers moving quickly as he tried to regain access to the system. "They're using a mirror protocol," Daniel said, his voice tense. "It's like a digital copy of your server, but they're routing the commands through a proxy. If we don't shut it down fast, it'll siphon off everything: files, schematics, client data. It'll look like a data breach from the inside." Sarah clenched her fists. "How long do we have?" "Minutes," Daniel replied. "Maybe less." The SUV screeched to a halt outside Donovan Tech's towering headquarters. Security personnel were already waiting, their faces grim as they ushered Sarah and the team inside. The building's sterile white walls and polished floors felt colder than ever as they rushed toward the central server room. When they arrived, the room was a hive of activity. Technicians were at their stations, frantically trying to make sense of the chaos on their screens. Sarah's heart sank when she saw the scale of the attack. The system was under siege, red alerts flashing everywhere, and the network map looked like a battlefield. Daniel didn't waste a second. He pushed past the technicians and plugged his laptop into the central console. "I need full access," he said, his voice commanding. One of the lead technicians hesitated, glancing at Sarah for confirmation. She nodded sharply. "Do whatever he says." Daniel dove into the system, his eyes narrowing in concentration. "They've already breached the outer layers of security," he said, "but there's still a chance to stop them before they get to the core." Sarah watched, her heart pounding, as lines of code scrolled rapidly across the screens. She felt helpless, out of her depth in a situation that required skills she didn't have. But she refused to stand idly by. "What can I do?" she asked, stepping closer to Daniel. He glanced at her briefly, then pointed to another console. "Monitor the activity here. If you see any spikes in data transfer, let me know immediately." Sarah nodded and took her place at the console. The screen was a blur of numbers and commands, but she forced herself to focus. This was her company, her responsibility. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as Daniel worked, the room filled with tense silence except for the hum of machines and the occasional barked command. Then suddenly he froze. "There it is," he said, his voice low but triumphant. "What?" Carter asked, stepping forward. "The back door," Daniel replied. "It's hidden in a shell script, buried so deep it barely registers, but it's there. Can you shut it down?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with anticipation. Daniel nodded, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "I'm isolating it now. Once I disconnect it from the network, the connection will collapse." The tension in the room was palpable as everyone watched the screen. Then, with a final keystroke, Daniel leaned back in his chair. "It's done," he said, exhaling sharply. "The back door is closed. They're locked out." A wave of relief swept through the room, but it was short-lived. Sarah's console lit up with another alert, this one different from the others. "There's another spike," she said, her voice trembling. "It's coming from the executive floor. Daniel's eyes widened. That's impossible. The executive floor isn't connected to the main server. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She knew exactly what was on the executive floor, her private office, and more importantly, her personal server. Unlike the company's main system, her personal server contained sensitive information about ongoing projects, financial records, and even her private communications. "They're going after my personal files," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Carter was already moving. "We're not letting that happen." Sarah followed him, her fear and determination driving her forward. When they reached the executive floor, the scene was eerily quiet. The dim lighting cast long shadows across the hall, and the air felt heavy with anticipation. They reached her office, and Sarah's heart sank when she saw the door ajar. Inside, a figure was hunched over her desk, a portable device plugged into her server. "Step away," Carter barked, his weapon drawn. The figure froze, then slowly raised their hands. When they turned around, Sarah felt her breath catch. It was someone she recognized, her assistant, Emily. "Emily," Sarah said, disbelief and betrayal washing over her. Emily's face was pale, but her eyes were defiant. "I had no choice," she said quietly. "What are you talking about?" Sarah demanded. "You've been with me for years. Why would you do this?" Emily hesitated, then glanced at the device still plugged into the server. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she said. "They'd promised me it would just be a scare, a way to make you pay attention to the risks you were ignoring. But then they kept pushing, and I couldn't stop it." Sarah's mind reeled. "Who are they? Who's behind this?" Emily swallowed hard. "A competitor. They wanted to cripple Donovan Tech, force a buyout. I didn't know how far they'd take it." The betrayal cut deep, but there was no time to dwell on it. Carter's team moved in, securing Emily and the device she had used. Daniel arrived moments later, his face grim as he assessed the damage. "We caught it in time," he said. "The files weren't fully transferred." Relief flooded through Sarah, but it was tempered by the weight of what had happened. She turned to Emily, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. "You were like family," she said, "and you almost destroyed everything." Emily looked away, her expression filled with regret. As the dust settled, Sarah stood in her office, the enormity of the night finally sinking in. Donovan Tech had survived, but not without scars. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, rebuilding trust, fortifying security, and confronting the betrayal of someone she had trusted implicitly. But as she looked out over the city, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about protecting her company anymore. It was about proving that no matter how many challenges came her way, she would rise above them. The lesson was clear. Even in the face of betrayal and adversity, resilience and determination could prevail. And as Sarah turned back to her team, she knew they would face whatever came next, together.